Life is a fleeting shadow, a whisper in the wind.
The year is 705 AD, and inside the Forbidden City, an 80-year-old woman sits alone in a cold palace room, stripped of her titles, her power, her very name, waiting for death to claim what her enemies could not take by force. Just weeks earlier, she had been the most powerful person on Earth, ruling over 1/4 of humanity, commanding armies that stretched from the Korean peninsula to the borders of Persia. Her word was absolute law across an empire larger than Rome at its peak. Now, she is nothing, her reign erased, her achievements attributed to others, her name spoken only in whispers and curses. This is Wu Zetian, the only woman in 4,000 years of Chinese history to claim the title of emperor. Not empress, not consort, not regent, but emperor. And her story is so controversial, so violent, so absolutely extraordinary that traditional historians have spent 13 centuries trying to bury it, distort it, and pretend it never happened. But here's what they don't want you to understand. Wu Zetian didn't just break the glass ceiling. She shattered it so completely that the patriarchal establishment had to spend generations putting the pieces back together. And the methods she used, the bodies she climbed over, the children she allegedly murdered, and the empire she transformed reveal something terrifying about power itself, something that makes both feminists and traditionalists deeply uncomfortable, because Wu Zetian wasn't a hero or a villain. She was something far more complex, far more human, and far more dangerous than the legends suggest. The story begins not in a palace but in a place far more humble, in 624 AD in Wenshui, Shaanxi province, where a girl is born to a family that is neither noble nor peasant, but somewhere frustratingly in between. Wu Zhao, as she was originally named, is the daughter of Wu Shihua, a wealthy timber merchant who made his fortune supplying wood to the Tang Dynasty's military machine during the Wars of Unification. Her father is new money, recently ennobled for his services, which means the family has wealth but not prestige, influence but not respect. They exist in that dangerous middle zone where they can see the peaks of power but cannot quite reach them. Wu Zhao's mother, Lady Yang, comes from a more established aristocratic background, and this creates a fascinating dynamic in young Wu's upbringing because she is raised with the education and expectations of nobility while constantly reminded that she is not quite one of them. Not yet. Not unless she makes it happen herself. In 7th century China, a girl's destiny is supposed to be simple. Marry well, produce sons, die quietly. But Wu Zhao is given something unusual, something that will change everything. An education. Her father, perhaps because he has no sons at the time, perhaps because he recognizes something special in this daughter, ensures that Wu learns to read and write. She studies literature, music, and history, absorbing the classics that most girls are forbidden from touching. She reads about the great emperors and their strategies, about court intrigue and political maneuvering, about power and how it flows like water, always seeking the lowest point unless channeled and controlled. This education is her first weapon, and she will use it to lethal effect. When Wu is 13, her father dies, and the family's status immediately becomes precarious. Her half-brothers from her father's first marriage, resentful of having to share their inheritance with these upstarts, treat Wu, her mother, and her full sister with barely concealed contempt. They are pushed to the margins of the family, given just enough to survive but not enough to thrive, and Wu learns her second crucial lesson. Blood means nothing when power is involved. Family will betray you as quickly as strangers if it serves their interests. At 14, Wu's life takes its first dramatic turn when word spreads through the aristocratic networks that Emperor Taizong is seeking new concubines for his court, and someone, perhaps a family connection, perhaps Lady Yang's maneuvering, perhaps Wu's own emerging reputation for beauty and intelligence, brings her to the emperor's attention. In 638, Wu Zhao enters the Forbidden City as a 5th-rank concubine, one of the lowest positions in the imperial harem. She is 14 years old, and she is about to enter the most cutthroat political arena in the world. Now, let's understand what the imperial harem actually is. because it's not what you think. This isn't just a collection of women waiting to please the emperor. It's a hierarchical bureaucracy with ranks, titles, salaries, and political factions that would make Renaissance Italy look tame. Emperor Taizong has dozens of concubines, maybe over 100 depending on how you count, and they are divided into 9 ranks, each with specific duties, privileges, and most importantly, access to the emperor. The empress stands at the top, but below her is a complex web of jealousy, ambition, and constant scheming because everyone knows the formula. Catch the emperor's eye, bear him a son, see that son become emperor, become empress dowager with absolute power. It's the only path to real power for a woman in this system, and the competition is murderous, sometimes literally. Wu is given the title Chiron, and here's where the legends start to diverge wildly from reality. Traditional accounts, written by Confucian scholars who despised everything Wu would become, claim she immediately began seducing her way to power, using her beauty and sexuality as weapons. But here's what they always leave out. Emperor Taizong barely notices her. For 12 years, Wu remains a low-ranking concubine. She doesn't bear the emperor any children. She doesn't rise in rank. By all accounts, she is failing at the one game women are allowed to play. But Wu is playing a different game entirely. She's watching, learning, making connections, and most crucially, she's getting close to someone who will change everything. Crown Prince Li Ji, the emperor's 9th son. The relationship between Wu and Li Ji during Emperor Taizong's lifetime is one of history's most controversial questions, and it's impossible to know the full truth because the sources are hopelessly biased. Traditional historians claim Wu seduced the crown prince while his father was still alive, that she committed the ultimate taboo by having an affair with her emperor's son, and that this proves her fundamental immorality. But other sources suggest something more innocent. Perhaps they simply talked, perhaps Wu, educated and intelligent, became a companion to a lonely prince. Perhaps they formed a genuine emotional connection. What we know for certain is that by 649, when Emperor Taizong is dying, Li Ji is already infatuated with Wu Zhao, and she has planted seeds that will soon bloom into power. When Emperor Taizong dies on May 26, 649, Wu faces the fate of all imperial concubines who failed to bear sons. She is sent to Ganya Temple to become a Buddhist nun. Her hair is shaved, she is given robes and a new religious name, and she is expected to live out her days in prayer and meditation, forgotten by the world. For most women in her position, this is the end of the story, a quiet fade into obscurity. Wu Zhao is 24 years old, and she has just lost everything. Or has she? Here's where Wu demonstrates the calculating brilliance that will define her reign, because what happens next is so perfectly executed that it has to have been planned. Crown Prince Li Ji, now Emperor Gaozong, is required to observe morning rituals at Ganya Temple, and during one of these visits, he encounters Wu again. According to some accounts, they see each other and weep, overcome with emotion at their reunion. According to other accounts, Wu has arranged the entire meeting, ensuring she is visible at exactly the right moment, her shaved head somehow making her more striking, more memorable, her tears perfectly calibrated to break his heart. What happens next scandalizes the court. In 651, just 2 years after his father's death, Emperor Gaozong recalls Wu from the temple and reinstalls her in the palace. Not as a nun returning to secular life, not as a servant, but as a concubine once again. This is shocking because it violates fundamental Confucian principles. A son taking his father's concubine is considered a form of incest. It's taboo on the deepest level, but Gaozong doesn't care. He wants Wu, and he is emperor, which means what he wants, he gets. But here's what makes this even more complex. Gaozong is not a strong emperor. He suffers from dizzy spells and blinding headaches, possibly stroke symptoms, possibly hypertension, and he is gentle, indecisive, easily influenced. His wife, Empress Wang, is a good Confucian woman, proper and virtuous and completely unable to give him sons. She has failed at the one job that matters, and the most powerful consort in the palace, consort Xiao, is circling like a shark, ready to replace her. Empress Wang makes a calculation that will destroy her. She thinks Wu can be her ally. She believes that by bringing Wu back to court and supporting her rise, she can create a counterweight to consort Xiao, dividing the emperor's attention and preventing any single rival from becoming too powerful. This is the fatal mistake because Empress Wang doesn't understand who Wu Zhao really is. Wu enters the palace in 651 and immediately begins to move. She doesn't waste time with half measures or patience. Within a year, she bears Emperor Gaozong a son, then another son, then finally, critically, a daughter. She is rising through the concubine ranks like a rocket, from 5th rank to 4th to 2nd, and Emperor Gaozong is increasingly relying on her, not just for companionship or sex, but for advice, for political counsel, because Wu is smart in ways that Empress Wang is not. Wu understands how power works, how to manipulate factions, how to whisper the right suggestion at the right moment. By 654, Wu is a first-rank concubine, just one step below Empress, and everyone can see where this is heading. The question is not if Wu will try to become Empress, but how and who will die in the process. And then, in 654, something happens that will haunt Wu Zetian's legacy for 13 centuries. Something so dark, so controversial, that historians still argue about whether it actually occurred. Her infant daughter dies, and Wu accuses Empress Wang of murdering the baby. Here's what the official histories say. Empress Wang comes to visit Wu and admires the infant daughter. After she leaves, Wu smothers her own child and then starts screaming that the Empress has committed murder. When Emperor Gaozong arrives, he finds his daughter dead and Wu hysterical with grief. And he believes her, because why wouldn't he? Who would murder their own child for political advantage? The accusation destroys Empress Wang, even though there's no evidence. Even though the entire story seems impossibly monstrous, Emperor Gaozong turns against his wife, and Wu has eliminated her greatest obstacle. But here's what modern historians point out. This story comes from sources written decades or even centuries after the fact by scholars who hated Wu and wanted to portray her as a monster. The original contemporary sources don't mention infanticide at all. They simply note that Wu accused Empress Wang of witchcraft and gained the emperor's favor. It's entirely possible that the baby died of natural causes, extremely common in the 7th century, and Wu simply used the tragedy to her political advantage, or that the entire infanticide story was invented later to demonize her. We will never know the truth, but what matters is that the accusation works. Emperor Gaozong strips Empress Wang and consort Xiao of their ranks and imprisons them, and in 655, against the protests of almost every senior official in the court, he elevates Wu Zhao to the position of Empress. She is 30 years old, and she has gone from concubine to Empress in just 4 years, and the aristocratic establishment is absolutely terrified because they understand that Wu is not like other empresses. She is not content to be ornamental, she wants real power, and she is willing to do absolutely anything to get it. What happens next is so brutal that it reveals the darkness at the heart of Wu's ambition. Because Empress Wang and consort Xiao, imprisoned and humiliated, are still alive, and as long as they live, they remain potential rallying points for Wu's enemies. According to the histories, Wu orders that their hands and feet be cut off, that they be thrown into wine vats, and that they be left to drown in alcohol and their own blood. Before she dies, Empress Wang curses Wu, saying, "May Wu be reincarnated as a mouse, and may I return as a cat to bite her throat." This curse apparently haunts Wu for the rest of her life. She has nightmares about cats. She eventually bans cats from all imperial residences, and even in her 80s, she will start awake in the night, convinced she hears the voice of Empress Wang calling for revenge. Whether this is true or propaganda, it reveals something important. Wu has won, but the victory has marked her soul, and her enemies will never let her forget what she did to claim power. As Empress, Wu immediately begins consolidating her position, and she does it by attacking the aristocratic families that have dominated Chinese politics for centuries. The Tang Dynasty, like most Chinese dynasties, is run by a small number of prestigious families who pass down positions, wealth, and influence through generations like a closed club. and they despise Wu because she is not one of them. She is new money, merchant class pretending to be noble, and worse, she is a woman who refuses to stay in her place. Wu understands that these families are her greatest threat, so she begins systematically destroying them, and her weapon is the bureaucratic examination system. Now, China has had civil service examinations for centuries, but they've always been supplemented by aristocratic privilege. Noble families get their sons into positions regardless of merit. Wu changes this. She expands the examination system, makes it more rigorous, more meritocratic, and most importantly, she starts promoting men from humble backgrounds, men who owe their positions to her rather than to family connections. This is revolutionary. It's essentially creating a new ruling class based on talent and loyalty rather than birth, and it makes Wu incredibly popular with the common people and the emerging scholar-official class while enraging the aristocracy. But popularity with commoners doesn't protect you when you're playing palace politics, so Wu builds a second weapon, a secret police force that will become legendary for its brutality. She promotes officials who are willing to use torture, false accusations, and terror to destroy her enemies. Men like Sua Yuanli and Zhou Xing, who develop elaborate torture devices with poetic names like the human ladder and the donkey foal, and who encourage servants and slaves to denounce their masters. The system works through fear. No one is safe. Anyone can be accused of treason at any moment, and once accused, torture will extract whatever confession is needed. Wu uses this system to destroy dozens of aristocratic families, to eliminate officials who oppose her, and to create an atmosphere of absolute terror where no one dares to challenge her authority. And here's the disturbing thing. It works, the aristocracy is broken, the examination system creates a new meritocratic elite, and the empire actually prospers because whatever else Wu is, she is an effective administrator. Between 655 and 683, Wu serves as Empress, but she is not content with the traditional role. When Emperor Gaozong suffers a severe stroke around 660, leaving him partially paralyzed and unable to perform his duties effectively, Wu steps in, and she doesn't step back. She begins attending imperial audiences behind a screen, whispering advice to the emperor, but everyone knows the whispers are commands. She reviews documents, makes decisions, and gradually the pretense drops and Wu is simply ruling with Gaozong as a figurehead. Officials who object are exiled, imprisoned, or worse, and Wu's sons, Crown Prince Li Hong and later Li Xian, watch their mother accumulate power and understand that they are not safe either. In 675, Crown Prince Li Hong dies suddenly at age 23, officially of illness, but rumors immediately spread that Wu poisoned him because he opposed her or because he was becoming too popular. For years later, the next crown prince, Li Xian, is accused of treason. Evidence of rebellion is conveniently discovered in his residence, likely planted, and he is exiled and eventually forced to commit suicide. Wu's third son, Li Zhe, becomes crown prince, and he is smart enough to be absolutely terrified of his mother. When Emperor Gaozong dies in December 683, the empire holds its breath, because everyone knows that the succession is about to become very complicated. Li Zhe, now Emperor Zhongzong, ascends the throne, and Wu becomes Empress Dowager, which traditionally means she should retire to a quiet life of prayers and grandchildren. Instead, within 6 weeks, Wu deposes her own son. She accuses him of being ungrateful and incompetent, and she installs his younger brother, Li Dan, as Emperor Ruizong. But everyone understands that Li Dan is even more of a puppet than Zhongzong was. He holds court, he wears the robes, but Wu makes every decision, issues every decree, and controls every aspect of government. For the next 7 years, Wu rules through her son, but she is increasingly frustrated by the pretense. She is the one with the vision, the intelligence, the will to rule, but she has to maintain the fiction that the emperor is in charge, and it's driving her insane. And then, in 690, Wu does something so audacious, so unprecedented, that it will make her simultaneously the most remarkable and the most controversial figure in Chinese history. She declares herself emperor, not empress, not regent, not dowager, but Huangdi emperor. She forces her son to abdicate. She establishes her own dynasty, the Zhou dynasty, replacing the Tang, and she takes the throne in her own name. She is 66 years old, and she has just done what no woman in Chinese history has ever done before or will ever do again. The official ceremony is carefully orchestrated. Wu presents documents signed by hundreds of officials and common people allegedly begging her to take the throne. She conducts elaborate rituals connecting her rule to ancient Zhou dynasty precedents. She issues proclamations explaining that heaven has withdrawn its mandate from the Tang and granted it to her. She even changes the calendar, renames the months, and alters governmental terminology to reflect the new dynasty. To her supporters, this is the culmination of decades of brilliant political maneuvering, proof that talent and will can overcome any social barrier. To her enemies, it's an abomination, a violation of the fundamental order of the universe. Because in Confucian philosophy, the relationship between ruler and subject is like that between husband and wife, fundamentally gendered, fundamentally hierarchical. And a woman emperor is as impossible and monstrous as water flowing uphill. But Wu doesn't care what they think because she is emperor now, and emperors don't justify themselves to anyone. Wu's reign as emperor, from 690 to 705, is 15 years of contradictions and complexities that defy simple narratives. And this is where both her admirers and her critics tend to be dishonest, because the truth is more complicated than either side wants to admit. Let's start with the terror, because it continues and even intensifies. Wu's secret police remain active. Dozens of officials are executed or exiled on charges of treason. She promotes men of low birth who are fanatically loyal to her, and she shows no mercy to anyone who questions her legitimacy. The torture chambers run red, and families of the old aristocracy live in constant fear that a knock on the door in the middle of the night will mean their destruction. Wu also engages in what we would now call personality cult. She commissions Buddhist texts that predict the coming of a female Buddha emperor. She builds massive statues including the famous Longmen Buddha that is carved with her face. And she surrounds herself with scholars who produce philosophical justifications for female rule, essentially creating propaganda to legitimize what cannot be legitimized in traditional Confucian thought. But here's what makes Wu's reign so frustrating for those who want simple heroes or villains. The empire actually thrives. She expands the examination system even further, creating new tests and promoting hundreds of capable administrators who would never have had opportunities under the old aristocratic system. She establishes the Crane examination to recruit unusual talent, and she listens to officials regardless of their background, valuing competence over pedigree. Under her rule, the borders are secure. She defeats the Turks in the north and expands Chinese influence in Central Asia. She maintains diplomatic relationships with dozens of kingdoms, and she avoids costly wars when possible, preferring strategic marriages and economic pressure. The economy grows, agricultural production increases due to improved irrigation and farming techniques that she promotes, and trade along the Silk Road flourishes because she maintains order and security. Common people are not overtaxed, compared to other periods of Chinese history, and there are no massive famines or peasant rebellions, which is pretty remarkable for a 15-year period. Wu also does something interesting with Buddhism. She promotes it heavily, partly because Buddhism is more accepting of women in leadership roles than Confucianism, and partly because it gives her an ideological counter to the Confucian establishment that hates her. She builds temples, sponsors translations of Buddhist texts, and positions herself as a bodhisattva figure, which infuriates Confucian scholars but gives her an alternative source of legitimacy. She's essentially playing different philosophical systems against each other, and it's brilliant political strategy. But Wu is also getting old, and with age comes vulnerability. In her 70s, she becomes increasingly reliant on favorites, and this is where things start to go wrong. She promotes two brothers, Zhang Yizhi and Zhang Changzong, to high positions, and rumor spreads, probably true, that they are her lovers. Now in Confucian morality, this is scandalous for a widow, let alone an emperor. But Wu doesn't care about sexual morality. She has broken every other rule, why not this one? But the problem isn't the sex. It's that the Zhang brothers are corrupt, incompetent, and hated. They take bribes, they abuse their power, and they give Wu's enemies exactly the ammunition they need, because now they can claim that the emperor is senile, controlled by pretty boys no longer fit to rule. In 705, when Wu is 80 years old and seriously ill, a group of officials led by Zhang Jianji stages a coup. They break into the palace, kill the Zhang brothers, and force Wu to abdicate in favor of her son, Emperor Zhongzong, whom she had deposed 22 years earlier. Wu, sick and exhausted, doesn't fight. She signs the abdication, and just like that, her reign is over, the Zhou dynasty is erased, the Tang dynasty is restored, and Wu Zetian, no longer emperor, no longer even Empress Dowager, is given the title Zetian, which means emulator of heaven, but is really just a polite way of setting her aside. She dies 10 months later, in December 705, and with her death, the establishment begins the work of erasing her. Her reign is declared illegitimate. The Zhou dynasty is removed from official chronologies. Her reforms are attributed to her sons or explained away, and history is rewritten to portray her as a monstrous aberration, a warning about what happens when women seek power. For the next 1300 years, Wu Zetian exists in Chinese history as a villain. She is the evil empress, the murderer of children, the usurper, the sexual deviant, everything wrong with ambition unchecked by morality. Confucian scholars write her up as a cautionary tale, and her name becomes synonymous with female treachery. But here's what that narrative deliberately hides. Wu Zetian was effective. She ruled for decades without major rebellions. She maintained prosperity. She expanded opportunity. And she demonstrated that a woman could do everything a man could do in the most male-dominated society on earth. And that's exactly why the establishment had to destroy her reputation. Because if Wu succeeded, if her reign was good, then it means that all the Confucian philosophy about natural gender hierarchy is wrong. It means that excluding half of humanity from power is arbitrary rather than natural. And that's an idea so dangerous that it has to be buried, distorted, and explained away. Modern historians have begun to reevaluate Wu, looking past the propaganda to examine what she actually did versus what she was accused of doing. And the picture that emerges is complex. Yes, she was ruthless, probably murdered political opponents, possibly killed her own daughter, certainly presided over a regime of terror, but she was also competent, strategic, and in many ways more effective than the emperors who came before and after her. She expanded opportunity for common people, weakened the stranglehold of aristocratic families, and left the empire stronger than she found it. The question we're left with is one that makes everyone uncomfortable. Can we separate the achievements from the methods? Can we acknowledge that Wu did terrible things while also recognizing that she faced impossible obstacles and overcame them through brilliance and will? And here's the deepest question, the one that explains why Wu's story still matters 14 centuries later. Did the system force Wu to become a monster, or did the monster use the system to gain power? Because think about it, every path to power for a woman in 7th century China required destroying other women. There was only one empress position, and hundreds of concubines competing for it. The system literally forced women to see each other as enemies, to plot against each other, to eliminate rivals. Wu couldn't form alliances with other women because the structure of the harem made that impossible. She couldn't refuse to play the game because refusal meant obscurity and death, so she played, and she played better than anyone else. And then when she reached the top, she found that the only way to stay there was through terror because legitimacy was impossible. She was a woman in a man's role, and half the empire would always want her dead for that reason alone. But acknowledging this doesn't excuse the torture, the executions, the possible infanticide. It just complicates the narrative, makes Wu human rather than either heroic or monstrous. She is a person who faced impossible choices and made terrible ones, who achieved greatness through methods that horrify us, who broke barriers while crushing everyone in her path. And here's what the historians who erased Wu understood. Her story is dangerous, not because it encourages women to murder their way to power. Most people aren't going to do that regardless of historical precedent. But because it proves that the barriers are artificial, that natural hierarchy is just enforced hierarchy, that given the opportunity and the will, A woman could rule as effectively or as terribly as any man, and once you accept that, the entire philosophical foundation of patriarchal society starts to crack. That's why Wu had to be erased, demonized, explained away as an aberration, because if she was possible, then she was not unique. Then there could be others, and the system that kept women powerless would be revealed as choice rather than nature. Today, Wu Zetian exists in multiple narratives simultaneously. Chinese feminists claim her as an icon of female empowerment. Nationalists celebrate her as a strong ruler who expanded Chinese influence. Traditionalists still condemn her as proof of what happens when natural order is violated, and historians argue endlessly about which sources to trust and how to weigh her crimes against her achievements. The truth is probably that all of these narratives capture something real. Wu was empowering and oppressive, brilliant and brutal, a victim of systemic gender oppression who became an oppressor herself. She is, in other words, exactly like most rulers throughout history, male rulers, who we somehow manage to evaluate with more nuance than we grant to her. When we study Alexander the Great, we discuss his military genius and his empire building while acknowledging his massacres and his megalomania. When we study Julius Caesar, we analyze his political brilliance and his reforms while noting his atrocities in Gaul. When we study Napoleon, we recognize his administrative achievements and his military innovation while condemning his wars of aggression. We grant these men complexity. We understand that historical figures are products of their times and systems, and we evaluate their legacies in full context. But with Wu Zetian, we tend to reduce her to a single dimension. Either she's a feminist icon beyond criticism, or she's an evil murderer whose achievements don't matter. And both approaches do a disservice to the historical reality and to our understanding of power itself, because Wu's story teaches us something uncomfortable about what power requires, about the compromises and cruelties that seem to be endemic to wielding ultimate authority, regardless of gender. The structures that Wu operated within were violent and oppressive. The imperial system was built on hierarchy, fear, and the absolute subordination of millions to one individual. And Wu didn't invent that system, she inherited it. And when she finally claimed the throne, she used the tools the system provided because those were the only tools available. The secret police, the torture chambers, the purges, these weren't innovations, they were standard imperial practice. Wu just used them. Against different targets, against the aristocratic families instead of peasant rebels, against Confucian scholars instead of Buddhist monks. Does this excuse her actions? No, but it does contextualize them. It reminds us that condemning Wu for tyranny while celebrating male emperors who did the same things is applying a double standard that reveals our biases rather than historical truth. And it forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about what we actually want from our historical figures and our political leaders. Would we prefer that Wu had been virtuous and powerless, a good Confucian woman who accepted her subordinate role and lived quietly? Or are we willing to acknowledge that in the world she inhabited, virtue and power were incompatible, that the choice was between remaining good and invisible or becoming terrible and effective? These aren't academic questions, they have contemporary relevance because every woman who seeks power in male-dominated fields faces a version of Wu's dilemma, maybe not murder and torture, thankfully, but the question of how much of yourself you have to compromise, how aggressive you have to be, how many feminine qualities you have to suppress or how many masculine ones you have to adopt, and how you navigate a system that was designed to exclude you while being judged by standards that others aren't held to. Wu Zetian's memorial stele stands outside her tomb, and it's blank, no inscription, no epitaph, no summary of her reign or her achievements, and there are competing theories about why. Some say Wu ordered it left blank because she believed her achievements were so great that words couldn't capture them. Others say her son left it blank because he couldn't figure out how to evaluate his mother's legacy, couldn't decide whether to condemn or praise, and so chose silence. And some say it was left blank so that future generations could write their own judgments, each era interpreting Wu according to its own values and needs. All of these theories are probably partly true because Wu's legacy is genuinely contested in ways that most historical figures' legacies are not. She doesn't fit into our categories. She breaks our frameworks. She forces us to hold contradictory truths in our minds simultaneously, and that discomfort is valuable because it reveals the limitations of our thinking about power, gender, and history. In 2014, a Chinese historian named Shui Yong published a controversial essay arguing that Wu Zetian should be recognized as one of China's greatest emperors, period. Not greatest female emperor, but greatest emperor, based on metrics like economic growth, territorial stability, administrative reform, and promotion of talent. And the essay sparked furious debate because it forced people to confront their assumptions. If we judge rulers by results rather than methods or gender, Wu ranks very high. If we judge by ethics and human rights, Wu ranks very low. But that's true of almost every pre-modern ruler, so why do we hold her to different standards? The question has no easy answer, which is precisely why Wu's story remains relevant. She lived 13 centuries ago, but the issues her life raises about ambition, power, gender, morality, and the compromises required to achieve greatness in an unjust system are absolutely contemporary. And whether we celebrate her or condemn her, we cannot ignore her. She forced her way into history, literally carved her face into mountains, and made herself impossible to erase no matter how hard subsequent generations tried. Wu Zetian ruled over 50 million people, controlled an empire that stretched across most of Asia, defeated armies, built monuments, reformed government, promoted talent, presided over prosperity, and also murdered, tortured, and terrorized her way to the top. She was human in all the best and worst ways that word implies, brilliant and cruel, visionary and vengeful, empowering and oppressive, and her blank tombstone stands as a challenge to every generation. How will you judge her? What will you write on the stone? And what does your judgment reveal about you and your values rather than about her? The empress they tried to erase couldn't be erased. Her reign couldn't be undone. Her precedent couldn't be eliminated. She proved that the barriers were breakable even if the cost was terrible, and 1300 years later, we're still arguing about what that means, still trying to reconcile the contradictions, still uncomfortable with a woman who refused to be anything other than everything she could possibly be, regardless of rules, regardless of morality, regardless of the bodies she had to climb over to reach the throne. And maybe that discomfort is exactly the legacy she wanted to leave. Maybe the blank stone was her final act of brilliance, forcing us to confront our own assumptions rather than accepting easy narratives, making us complicit in writing history rather than passive consumers of it, ensuring that her story would never be settled, never be comfortable, never be forgotten, because comfortable stories about women who know their place and stay in it are easily erased, but a woman who seized ultimate power and held it for decades, who rewrote the rules and broke the system and forced the world to acknowledge her. That woman cannot be erased no matter how hard you try. Her story survives because it's too important, too troubling, too necessary to ignore, and Wu Zetian, the empress they erased, turns out to be the empress who cannot be erased, the woman who won by making herself impossible to forget, and her blank memorial stands not as absence but as presence, not as silence but as a challenge echoing across centuries, asking each generation the same question. What will you make of me? And what does your answer reveal about the world you want to live in? But there's more to understand about Wu's methods and the specific mechanisms through which she maintained power for so long. Because ruling isn't just about seizing the throne, it's about keeping it. And Wu kept it through a combination of genuine administrative talent, strategic brutality, and psychological manipulation that deserves closer examination. Consider her relationship with Buddhism and how she weaponized religion for political purposes. This wasn't simple cynicism, though there was certainly calculation involved. Wu genuinely seems to have been a Buddhist believer. She funded temples throughout her life, supported monks and nuns, and studied Buddhist texts seriously. But she also understood that Buddhism gave her something Confucianism never could: ideological legitimacy. Confucian philosophy is built on rigid hierarchies with the emperor at the top, but always male, always the yang principle, the active force, while women represent yin, passive, subordinate, receptive. There is literally no space in Confucian cosmology for a female emperor. It's not just untraditional, it's cosmologically impossible, like having darkness at noon or water that burns. But Buddhism, particularly Mahayana Buddhism, has a different structure. It includes female bodhisattvas. It acknowledges that enlightenment is available to all beings regardless of gender. And it has prophecies about world-ruling monarchs called Chakravartin who bring Dharma to earth. And Wu seized on this. She commissioned scholars to find or create Buddhist texts that prophesied the coming of a female Buddha ruler. And surprise, they found them. Texts that described a woman called Maitreya, who would rule in a time of peace and prosperity. And Wu positioned herself as this figure, the fulfillment of Buddhist prophecy, which meant opposing her wasn't just political treason, it was opposing the will of the cosmos itself. The famous Dayun Sutra, or Great Cloud Sutra, was distributed to temples throughout the empire with Wu's patronage, and it explicitly stated that a woman would rule as Chakravartin, bringing enlightenment to the world, and every temple was required to have a copy, to teach it, to preach about the coming female ruler. This is state propaganda at its most sophisticated, using religious authority to bypass Confucian objections, and it worked, at least partially, because it gave ordinary people a framework for accepting Wu's rule that didn't require them to reject everything they'd been taught about gender and hierarchy. Wu also understood spectacle and the power of visual symbolism in ways that most rulers miss. She didn't just occupy power, she performed it, constantly, elaborately, in ways designed to imprint her authority on the collective consciousness. The Long Men grottos, massive Buddhist cave temples carved into limestone cliffs near Luoyang, feature the Vairocana Buddha, a 56-foot tall statue whose face is reportedly modeled on Wu's own features. Imagine the psychological impact of this. Wherever you look, you see the Buddha, and the Buddha has the Empress's face. The divine and the political are literally merged, and the message is clear: to oppose Wu is to oppose enlightenment itself. She also changed the written characters used in official documents, creating new ideographs that included one for her personal name, Zhao, that couldn't be used by anyone else. She was literally inserting herself into the language, making her presence inescapable in every written document, every official communication, every transaction that required literacy. You couldn't escape Wu because she had written herself into the script, and when she fell, one of the first things her successors did was ban these characters, try to erase them from usage, but the attempt to linguistically delete her failed, just like everything else. Wu's court was also culturally sophisticated in ways that complicate the monster narrative. She patronized poets, musicians, and scholars. She expanded the imperial library. She commissioned historical compilations and literary works, and many of the intellectuals she promoted produced work of lasting value. She wasn't anti-intellectual. She was anti-aristocratic monopoly on intellectual life. She wanted talent from all classes, and she created opportunities for brilliant people who would have been excluded under the old system. The poet Song Jiwen, the historian Lu Zhiji, the Buddhist translator Yijing, all flourished under Wu's patronage, and their work outlasted her dynasty. There's also the question of Wu's personal relationships and whether she was capable of genuine affection or if everything was calculation. And here the sources give us frustratingly little to work with because they're so biased. But there are hints that Wu was not simply a sociopath. She seems to have genuinely cared for Emperor Gaozong despite using him politically. She nursed him through his illnesses, she wept at his death, and she kept his memory honored even after she took the throne. Herself, which she didn't have to do, she could have demonized him to justify her own rule, but she didn't. Her relationships with her children are more complex. She clearly had favorites. She seems to have been genuinely devastated by the death of her eldest son Li Hong, even though rumors said she poisoned him. She may have loved him and still felt she had no choice but to eliminate him if he threatened her power, which is a tragedy of a different kind. The tragedy of someone who has been shaped by a brutal system into someone who destroys what they love. With her daughters, Wu seems to have been protective and ambitious on their behalf. She arranged advantageous marriages. She gave them education and status. She tried to create opportunities for them that she herself had lacked in her youth. There's a humanity there, twisted by the imperatives of power, but present nonetheless. Wu's physical vitality is also remarkable and worth noting. She lived to 81 in an era when life expectancy for aristocrats was perhaps 50. She remained mentally sharp until very near the end. She was still making administrative decisions and political maneuvers in her late 70s. And she was apparently sexually active into her 70s with the Zhang brothers. Whether we find this admirable or scandalous says more about our attitudes toward aging and female sexuality than about Wu herself. A 75-year-old male emperor having young concubines would be completely unremarkable in Chinese history. It happened constantly. But Wu doing the equivalent is treated as evidence of degeneracy, which reveals the double standard perfectly. The coup that finally overthrew Wu in 705 is worth examining in more detail because it shows both her vulnerability and her continued shrewdness even at 80. The conspirators, led by Prime Minister Zhang Jianji and General Li Duozhua, were not opposed to Wu because she was female. They were opposed because she had elevated the Zhang brothers, incompetent favorites who were corrupt and destabilizing. The conspirators actually included several officials who Wu herself had promoted, men who owed their careers to her but who believed she was no longer competent to rule. This wasn't ideological, it was practical. They thought the empire needed a functional government, not one run by pretty boys and a senile octogenarian. The coup itself was remarkably bloodless. They entered the palace with 500 soldiers. They found Wu in her quarters, sick and bedridden. They killed the Zhang brothers in front of her, and they demanded she abdicate in favor of her son Zhongzong. And Wu, who had spent 50 years clawing her way to power and holding it against all opposition, simply agreed. She didn't fight. She didn't call for loyal troops. She didn't resist. She signed the abdication and accepted the title of retired emperor. And this surrender is significant because it suggests that Wu knew when she was beaten, that she was capable of rational calculation even in extremis, that she wasn't insane or delusional. She had simply run out of moves. Her last 10 months of life, living in seclusion in the palace as retired emperor, are poignant because we see Wu stripped of power but not of dignity. She receives visits from her son, who is remarkably kind to her considering their history. She writes poetry, she reflects on her life, and according to some accounts, she expresses regret not for taking power, but for some of the methods she used, for the people she hurt, for the family members she destroyed. Whether this is genuine repentance or romanticized fiction we cannot know. But it's telling that even her enemies felt compelled to give her some measure of peace at the end. They didn't execute her, they didn't humiliate her publicly, they let her die with dignity, which suggests that even those who overthrew her recognized something extraordinary in what she had accomplished. When Wu died on December 16, 705, the court faced an immediate problem. How do you conduct funeral rites for someone who was emperor but whose reign you're now claiming was illegitimate? They compromised. She was buried with full imperial honors alongside Emperor Gaozong, her husband, in the Qianling Mausoleum, one of the most impressive Tang Dynasty tombs. But her titles were ambiguous, not quite emperor, not quite empress, something in between, and her blank stele stands there to this day. A massive stone that should have been carved with her achievements but instead sits empty, and tourists and historians have been arguing about what it means ever since. The immediate aftermath of Wu's death saw a systematic attempt to dismantle her legacy. The Zhou dynasty was declared to have never existed. It was removed from chronologies. It became a gap in history. The Tang dynasty was retroactively extended to cover her reign, as if she had simply been regent the entire time. Officials she promoted were purged if they were too closely associated with her. Reforms she implemented were attributed to other emperors or explained away as inevitable. Developments and the historiographical tradition began the work of transforming her from a ruler into a monster. The Old Tang history and the New Tang history, the official dynastic histories compiled decades and centuries after her death, are relentlessly hostile to Wu. They blame her for every problem, they invent or exaggerate scandals. They portray her as sexually insatiable, morally bankrupt, and politically incompetent. And these accounts become the basis for how Wu is remembered for the next millennium, not as a complex political figure, but as a cautionary tale about female ambition. But here's what the historians couldn't erase. The actual results of her governance, the expansion of the examination system that they continued to use, the administrative structures she created that proved effective, the precedents she set for meritocracy over aristocracy that subsequent reformers would cite, the cultural production her court sponsored that remained valuable, the strategic decisions she made regarding borders and foreign policy that maintained stability, these things couldn't be undone just by calling her names in history books. And so Wu's influence persisted even as her memory was distorted. In Chinese culture more broadly, Wu became an archetypal figure. She appears in operas, in novels, in folklore, and in these popular traditions, she's often portrayed more sympathetically than in official histories. Common people recognize something in Wu that the Confucian establishment couldn't acknowledge. She was one of them. She came from outside the aristocracy. She broke the monopoly of noble families. She gave opportunities to talented people regardless of birth. And for all her cruelty, she represented possibility, the idea that the system could be changed, that barriers could be broken, that power could be redistributed. This dual tradition, official condemnation and popular fascination, has continued into the present, and it explains why Wu Zetian remains such a contested figure in contemporary China. During the communist period, Wu was sometimes rehabilitated as a proto-revolutionary who attacked feudal aristocracy. Mao Zedong reportedly admired her willingness to break old structures and promote people based on ability, though he also used her as an example when criticizing women in power who he perceived as threatening, showing that even revolutionaries have complicated relationships with female authority. In recent decades, as China has grappled with questions about gender equality, economic opportunity, and meritocracy, Wu has become even more prominent. There have been television series, films, novels, and academic conferences devoted to reassessing her legacy. Some Chinese feminists claim her as an icon, while others argue that celebrating someone who achieved power through violence and oppression is not feminist progress. It's just replacing male tyrants with female ones, and both positions have validity. What's fascinating is how Wu's story functions as a kind of Rorschach test. What you see in her reveals what you believe about power, gender, and ethics. If you believe that the system was so oppressive that breaking it justified any means, you see Wu as heroic. If you believe that methods matter as much as outcomes, you see her as monstrous. If you believe that women should be judged by the same standards as men, you evaluate her reign alongside other emperors and find it competent but brutal, typical of imperial rule. If you believe that women in power face unique obstacles and should be evaluated in that context, you see her crimes as products of systemic gendered violence that forced her into impossible choices. The truth, uncomfortable as it may be, is probably that Wu Zetian was neither hero nor villain but simply a human being who wanted power in a world that made power almost impossible for someone like her to obtain, and who was willing to pay any price, moral or otherwise, to get it and keep it. She internalized the logic of imperial autocracy perfectly, perhaps too perfectly. She understood that in a system based on absolute authority, there is no room for mercy, no space for doubt, no tolerance for weakness, and she acted accordingly, and the results were both impressive and horrifying, which is exactly what we should expect from imperial autocracy, regardless of who sits on the throne. What makes Wu's legacy enduring is not that she was good or bad, but that she was impossible. She did what everyone agreed could not be done. She held power that everyone agreed women could not hold. She succeeded in a system designed to ensure she would fail. And the fact that she did it through means that trouble us doesn't change the fundamental achievement, it just complicates how we respond to it. And maybe that complication is exactly what we need. Maybe simple narratives about power and gender are what got us into this mess. And maybe sitting with the discomfort of Wu's story, acknowledging both the achievement and the atrocity, is how we start to think more clearly about these issues. So when you visit the Qianling Mausoleum today, and you stand before Wu Zetian's blank memorial stele, you are standing before a challenge that has no easy answer, a question carved in stone but never written, a legacy that each generation must evaluate anew. And what you see in that blank stone, whether you see absence or presence, whether you see erasure or eternity, whether you see a monster or a revolutionary or a human being trying to survive in an impossible situation, that tells you something profound about yourself, about your values, about the world you want to live in and the compromises you're willing to make or unwilling to accept, and that, perhaps, is Wu Zetian's greatest achievement. Not the empire she ruled, not the dynasty she founded, not the barriers she broke, but the conversation she forced into existence, a conversation about power and gender and ethics that continues 13 centuries after her death, because she made herself impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss, impossible to erase, and in doing so, she achieved a kind of immortality that no amount of official condemnation could destroy, the immortality of someone who changed what we thought was possible, who expanded our understanding of what human beings, and specifically what women, are capable of achieving, for better and for worse, in all the complexity and contradiction that genuine achievement entails.